All right, my name is Jeremy Charlotte. I'm a University of Illinois Springfield student. Just to give you a little background about me, I wanted to be a cop since I was about 6. Anybody else want to be cops, or is this all corrections, or what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like half you guys? Okay. At any rate, I started my education in 2000, in the year 2000. I graduated high school in 1999, and I went to school at a small community college called Delta College in Saginaw, Michigan. I stayed there from 2000 to 2001, and I moved to Champaign in 2001. I then came to Parkland. So I started really got my feet in the door with school here at Parkland College. At the time I was studying computer network administration simply because I was only like 19 and you gotta be 21 to be a cop, and I needed to make money now, not in 3 years. So just the logistics of it, I was studying computer network administration. As many of you know, there is no degree requirements to become a police officer. The high school diploma will be enough. If I back it up with some computer knowledge, I was thinking maybe computer forensics, something along those lines. I was hired by the Parkland Police Department as a dispatcher in 2003. The same year, I lost my Pell Grant here for the school. It turns out when you're a 4-year associate student, they stop funding your ability to go to school. In order to keep going to school, they required me to transfer to a 4-year university. I transferred to the University of Illinois Springfield, again attempting to complete my bachelor's in computer science. At that time, an opening came up with the Parkland Police Department. As I was already a dispatcher there, I had the inside track on it. I ended up getting hired as one of the 2 police officer positions that were available at the time. Do any of you guys know Jake Brand? I think he's a detective here at Parkland. Yeah? No? At any rate, he still currently works here at Parkland. He and I were in the same class together 12 some odd years ago. I worked on my bachelor's degree in computer science from about 2003 to 2005. When I was hired by the Parkland College, I had to drop out of school. It turns out that you can't go to PTI, which is a 3-month in police training institute. It's a 3-month live-in boot camp type situation, and there's just not time for school and police training. I remained as a cop at Parkland here for just over a year, from 2005 to 2006. In 2006, the beginning of 2006, I was hired by the Mahomet Police Department, and I worked for the Mahomet Police Department from 2006 to 2017 when I retired. During that time, in 2008, I became a Metro SWAT operator, and I was on that SWAT team for 8 years. If you don't know what Metro SWAT is, there's 2 SWAT teams in Champaign County. There's a Champaign Police Department SWAT, and then there's also Metro SWAT. Champaign Police SWAT handles SWAT within Champaign only. Metro handles the rest of the county: Rantoul, Urbana, U of I, etc. In 2011, after being a cop for 7 years or something along those lines, I got in an argument with my daughter, who was 11 at the time. She was getting poor grades in school, and I expressed to her the need for education and the importance of college, and how her grades would have a role in that. Her, being a normal smart-ass teenager, decided to tell me that I was successful even though I didn't have a college degree. I didn't have an argument to that. My daughter just basically shut me down right there. I was like, oh shit, what do I do now? So what I did, I started school again. I returned to U of I Springfield, and I completed my bachelor's in business administration. I graduated magna cum laude in 2015 with my bachelor's in business administration, and in the spring of 2016, I began my master's in legal studies. Everything's gone well from there. I'm set to graduate with my master's in legal studies next semester with Professor Bridges here, so that'd be nice. At any rate, as a police officer, my specialties included narcotics investigation, obviously SWAT operations. I did everything on the SWAT team except for hostage negotiation, sniper, and there was one other thing I didn't do. Mobile field force, that's what it was. I was the first in the door. I held the ram busting in the doors. Oh, I also didn't do explosive entries. I was on the team for the explosive entries, but I didn't actually get to go boom. I went in the door after everything went boom. And as far as hostage negotiations, the extent of my hostage negotiations is talking until you can get a good sight picture. So that's how that works. Again, the reason I'm giving this presentation is we have a requirement. One of the classes that's required is called Policy Reform and Wrongful Conviction. It's LES 491. The focus of this course specifically is the use of incentivized criminal informants and how their use impacts wrongful conviction. That's convictions in which an innocent person is convicted of a crime that they did not commit. Instead of a final exam, we were tasked with developing a public education project. And again, that's what this is. I'm attempting to educate you all on what I believe would be the proper reforms needed to ensure that the innocent remain innocent and don't end up in prison unlawfully. Before we move forward, I want to tell you a little bit about this gentleman. His name's Nicholas Yaris. He was convicted of rape and murder in 1982. In 1981, he'd stolen a car. He was charged with, and when he was stopped in the stolen car, a scuffle broke out between him and the police officer. That's according to the police officer report. Mr. Yaris denied ever fighting the officer or that an altercation occurred at all. However, the officer brought charges of attempted murder of a police officer against him. Ultimately, he was convicted of the theft of the vehicle and sent to prison. He escaped the charges of attempted murder of a police officer, luckily, and in 1981 we didn't have cameras, so, you know, lucky for him, I guess. He went to prison. Due to the news, you know, just talk with inmates, that kind of thing, he heard of a lady named Linda Mae Craig. He heard she was kidnapped recently. He didn't want to be in prison. He was a drug addict, he was struggling with his addiction, he was going through withdrawals, whatnot, from being in jail, etc. He wanted to get out. So he made up a story. He made up some knowledge about Miss Craig's disappearance and attempted to use it as leverage to get out of jail early. He basically attempted to inform on somebody that didn't exist to get out of jail. Obviously, because he made up the story, the day after he gave this story to police, they found her body. She was raped and murdered and left for dead. So, obviously, because he made up the story, it really didn't pan out. You know, the police investigated and found out that he was full of shit. He didn't know what he was talking about, and they thought they were trying to lead him on a wild goose chase in order to direct them away from the suspect. As such, they started looking at him as the suspect. At the same time, a second jailhouse informant came forward and stated that Mr. Yaris confessed to him in a jail cell that he had killed Miss Craig and raped her. That led to his conviction, or his arrest and conviction in 1982 for the rape and murder. He was sentenced to death. He spent 22 years on death row. He was in segregation. He couldn't talk with anybody, couldn't communicate. He didn't get along with the guards because they kept telling him he couldn't speak. They needed to keep it down as to not agitate other guards or other prisoners. He received multiple beatings, one time ending up in 11 broken bones within his hand. He claimed his innocence the entire time. In 2003, the Innocence Project filed motions testing the killer's glove, the glove the killer used in the murder. What they found? He was innocent. He didn't do it. The DNA profile did not match. It eliminated him as a suspect. His lying, in addition to the lying of this other jailhouse informant, or snitch, whichever you prefer to call him, led to this man being wrongfully convicted of a rape and murder he did not commit. 22 years of this man's life were gone. This is Angel Gonzalez. In July 10th, 1994, two men forced a woman out of a bar in our hometown of Waukegan, Illinois. It's in our backyard. This isn't something that happened in California or New York or some major metropolitan city. This happened just a few hours north of here. After her rape, she reported it to police. She reported two suspects, two Hispanic males with dark hair, around 25 years old. They were average weight, and they were taller than her. She was approximately 5'7". She described the vehicle that they forced her into as a dark-colored, late-model four-door sedan with tinted windows. After reporting it, after going through all the rape kits and all the stuff that's necessary once you report it in rape, her and her boyfriend returned to their apartment at an apartment complex. As they approached the apartment complex, they saw Angel Gonzalez leaving the residence. The boyfriend saw him, thought it was suspicious, didn't recognize him, didn't recognize his vehicle. He called police. Police came and spoke with him. Angel just moved to the U.S. from Mexico. Didn't speak English very well, didn't read or write English, didn't have any idea what was going on. All he could gather was that a woman had been hurt and they were looking at him as the person who had hurt. He kept trying to explain that he was with his girlfriend and his girlfriend's sister all night at the apartment and hadn't been out. He had no idea a crime had even occurred. In addition, he didn't match the description of either suspect, and his vehicle didn't match the description either. He was taken into custody, temporarily detained, placed in handcuffs, and sat in the back of the squad car. Do y'all know what a show-up is? A show-up's when they take a suspect and they'll usually try not to have them in handcuffs or anything of that nature. There's a lot of policies that have changed in recent years involving show-ups. However, you bring a victim to the site where you have a suspect, and she identifies the suspect as either the person who committed the crime or did not commit the crime. Okay. Back in 1994, they didn't have all the policies we have now. So they brought her to the scene. They shined all of their lights on him so that she could not see him. This includes spotlights, everything, to draw her attention directly to him. Brought him out of the car in handcuffs and said, "Is that the guy who did it?" How predatory is that? I mean, he's standing there in handcuffs and you're going to ask, "Hey, is that the criminal?" Of course, she identified him as the suspect. He was arrested and taken to the police department. Again, he didn't speak English. They started talking to him and questioning him in English. Hours later, they finally brought a translator in, and that translator convinced him to write a confession in Spanish. He did so. The confession didn't match the police's narrative. It wasn't the same at all. Didn't fit the crime in any fashion. Why? Why do you think? Because it didn't match the confession, the police threw it out. They threw out that confession, and they wrote their own in English. He couldn't read it. He couldn't write it. He didn't know what it said, really. They forced him to sign it. So he signed this confession that the detectives wrote that fit their narrative, regardless of the fact that he just said he hadn't done it for hours and wrote his own confession that didn't fit their narrative. The Illinois Innocence Project filed a motion to have the evidence tested for DNA. 2 profiles of the rapists came of that. Neither was Angel. Angel was innocent. What they did find, of the 2 profiles, one was her boyfriend, the person who identified him as the suspect vehicle prior to that. Again, somebody lied, and this guy ended up getting sentenced to 40 years, serving 21 of them because somebody lied. This brings us to the
John, what are you eating? You didn't eat anything.
Yeah.
John, look at mommy.
Anything.
Are you telling me the truth?
Yeah.
You did-
Has anybody seen that video? I'm sorry? No? It's this little kid with candy all over his face. You would be able to see that. I saw the video on my computer. I don't know what's wrong with there. The computer, we're obviously having technical difficulties, so I set up my computer so you could at least hear the audio. I think you get the point of that video. The kid's obviously lying to his mom. He's got candy all over his face, etc. Author Brandon Garrett examined 250 cases in which DNA exonerated previously convicted individuals. What he found, 21% of those wrongfully convicted involved the use of false information provided by informants. That number's way too high. We can't allow that number of people to remain in prison wrongfully convicted when they are innocent. John Madinger, he's a narcotics officer and an author of multiple books on criminality and investigations. You may have used some of his books in some of your classes even. He's quoted as saying the following: "In the 25 years I have been in this business, I have worked with hundreds of informants. I believe that exactly one of them was completely truthful, and there is no way to be 100% sure about that. My 12 years of experience mirrors his. I can't even tell you that I have one that I believe fully. Everybody in this field has a motivation to lie to you, and I'm sure many other instructors have expressed to you how police officers become jaded over the years due to all of the lying, etc. I'm sure Ms. Bridges can attest to that as well. Bottom line, criminals lie. Snitches lie. Why do they lie? Because they're trying to get out of trouble. If you're looking at a 20-year sentence, are you going to do whatever you can to keep yourself out of prison? Why not throw somebody else under the bus? Why not make up information? Keep yourself out of prison, you get to be out on the street. Lots of benefits to that. That leads us to the question, are snitches needed? The short answer to that is yes, we absolutely need snitches. The reason for that is the police can't get access to these places where these criminal activities are happening. If I'm in full uniform and I walk up to you and say, hey buddy, can I buy a dime off you? What are you going to tell me? Exactly. There's no way in hell. You know I'm a cop and you're going to be, yes, here's my ounce of heroin. You know, it ain't going to happen. The point is, confidential informants can get access to areas where police simply cannot, so they are needed. As we can't trust, that's me as a cop, by the way. I was fat then. It's a lot of times that leads me to the question, who should be trusted? We should be able to trust the police, right? In theory. I mean, that's the theory. Would everybody agree with that? Unfortunately, you have situations like this.
Well, Diana and Sade, quite a turnabout. All of the criminal charges against Marcus Jeter have been dismissed. 2 Bloomfield cops have now been indicted. A third quietly pleaded guilty to tampering and retired. It's all because of video the cops may have tried to hide.
So now the cops are lying too. The cops are trumping up charges on people. They're screwing people over. Who do we trust? Whose responsibility is it to be trusted? It should be the police, I agree with you.
It's $2. Oh, hey! It's Samuel L. Jackson! Please, don't start telling me about how my movies have screwed up your kids, okay? No, actually, I was going to say you were great and unbreakable. Okay, my man, thank you. Too bad my kid's a supervillain that commits heinous crimes for his own sick amusement.
My son was attacked by a shark because he saw you in Deep Blue Sea.
How's that even my fault?
My son is a 22-year-old overweight nerd living in my basement because you decided to do Star Wars.
Yeah.
And my son has a severe peanut allergy because of you. My nickname's Gator and I smoke crack.
How's the jungle fever?
No, I never saw it. I just like crack.
What?
There he is.
Hey, you stalking me?
I have a son who's in prison because you were in Shawshank Redemption.
I wasn't even me. I was Morgan Freeman.
Well, you anyway. I got a kid who's an insomniac because you never sleep in your movies.
My 3-year-old saw you in Django Unchained. And now she can't stop saying the N-word.
You let your kid watch Django? Okay, everybody, listen. I know I play some bad dudes in movies, okay? But if my picture's on the poster, maybe your kid shouldn't watch it. Don't you?
Whose responsibility is this?
Parents.
Absolutely, it's the parents. Why wouldn't it be the parents? It makes no sense for all these people to be blaming them, right? Does it make any sense for us to rely on criminal informants to tell the truth? Why are they going to tell the truth? Look, I'll tell you, purple monkeys are flying out my butt if it keeps me out of jail. I'm not going to jail. All right? Who should be required to be truthful? The police, attorneys, judges, corrections officers, the legal system as a whole. We should be able to rely on them and trust that they're working for our best interest to keep our community safe, not putting innocent people in jail. Every officer takes an oath, something like this. I'm going to read it to you verbatim because it's strong in what it says. The oath I took stated, I, Officer Jeremy Charlo, solemnly swear that I shall support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Illinois, the law and the rules of the State of Illinois, the ordinances of the Village of Mahomet, the rules and regulations, practices, and procedures of the Mahomet Police Department, and that I shall faithfully discharge the duties of a police officer of the Village of Mahomet. Notice what this does not say. It does not say, well, I will lie to put somebody in prison. It does not say that I will frame an individual in order to make my numbers look better. It does not say that I will suborn perjury in order to get a criminal off the street. It does not say that I will railroad the innocent. This is where we need to focus. We've already determined that expecting a criminal not to lie is not going to be fruitful. What we absolutely should expect is the police and the legal system to be truthful in every action. We need to remove the focus on catching the criminal at all costs. We need to place the onus back on the criminal justice system, the police, the judges, the attorneys, etc. We need to hold agents of the government responsible for any misconduct. Because of that, I've suggested 5 reforms. The first reform is the creation of a certification for confidential informant handlers. One thing you'll learn in all of your police careers or whatever is there is a certification for everything. I think there may be even a certification to lace your boots in the morning. But there is a certification much like this called an alcohol enforcement certification. Any officer who is going to manage alcohol sting operations must have this certification before they can manage such a thing. Why? So they know what's going on, so they know how to do it properly without bias. We need to do the same involving criminal informants. The purpose of this certification is to educate officers. It's to educate the handlers. Remove argument for qualified immunity should they do wrong. Does everybody know what qualified immunity is? Basically, if a cop screws up, they have the ability, well, one cop in the nation, given each subject, has the ability to say, there's no case law in it, I didn't know. And therefore, they're not held liable. It's happened in shootings, when people have been murdered, etc. What I'm attempting to do here is educate the officers to remove any ability for them to claim qualified immunity when wrongdoing occurs. The requirements of this certification should be as follows. We need to teach the handlers the methods of recruitment. This will allow them the ability to better judge who a potential informant will be and the truthfulness they will have in providing information. We also need to teach handlers statistical information about the reliability of informant information. What this will do is allow the officers or the handlers to understand the need for corroboration and skepticism with any information they receive from an informant. We also need to teach the officers how to corroborate the information. If you don't learn how to ride a bike, how are you expected to ride the bike? The fourth thing we need to do is we need to help the officers and handlers understand the need for documentation. Every step in this process needs to be documented. I heard it all the time through the police academy. If you don't document it, it didn't happen. The best way to make sure that all of this has a paper trail is to document. The certification will also be required to help handlers understand the motivations behind informant cooperation. This helps them understand the reasons the informant may lie. Again, it bolsters their skepticism and will push the officer to better corroborate evidence they get from these informants. In addition, the officer needs to continue their education. If I learn how to sew 20 years ago, am I going to be as proficient as it today as I was then? Probably not. We need to continue the education of these officers in areas of law updates, best practices, and the latest research in order to ensure that they are working to their highest ability. In order to facilitate all of that, we need to hold them accountable. To hold them accountable, we will require recertification every 3 years. What this does is it sets the standards for community education requirements and ensures that each officer must participate if they want to remain capable of handling confidential informants. The second reform I suggest goes back to what I was saying earlier, documentation. Documentation is needed for multiple reasons. Most of all is so the defense attorney has access to the information provided by the snitch in order to judge if it's reliable or not. At the onset of each handler bringing on an informant, they need to create what's called a handler information packet. A confidential informant information packet. This packet should include the criminal history, the summary of their use, the reliability of that informant, violations of law while participating in the program, and all incentives offered to the individual. This is going to allow us to get a full picture of why this individual is participating with police and help us understand what their motivation for lying may be. This is a slide of bacon because I like bacon, so we'll go to the next slide. We cannot stop at a simple profile of each informant, all right? We need usage details. We need to understand how each of these informants are being used. To do so, we need to document all interactions with an informant. We need to know the reason for each contact. We need to know the information that was provided, and we need to know any steps the officer took to corroborate any evidence given by these informants. And again, any incentive offered at any time. The third area that we're talking about, let me step back. So far we've talked about the education of the handlers to manage informants, and we've also required a certification to educate the officers. The next step is we need to ensure that the documentation provided gets to the defense attorney so the defense attorneys can check out the reliability of the information provided. To do this, we need to require by statute the disclosure to the defense any information used at any time in any sort of crime given to them by an informant. The information that the defense attorney should have access to is the information provided by the informant, obviously, attempts and outcomes of all corroboration attempts. We don't want the police to just say, oh, we attempted this and it worked. We also want to know the 13 other things that they attempted that did not work. We want to know anytime this individual has committed, the informant has committed a new crime. This could also go to the reliability as a subject. If they've promised not to engage in further criminal activity and they are, should we rely on them? A CQH. A CQH is a criminal history. It's short through Leeds and NCIS. It's all of their criminal activities, every arrest they've ever had. It outlines their convictions, their arrests, etc. That's important for obvious reasons. If this person's a career criminal, knows the system, knows how to manipulate the system, the defense attorney should know about that. We also need to include historic reliability stats for that specific informant. Again, if he's informed on 4 other people, and 3 of those 4 other people he was found to be unreliable, that increases the chances of him being unreliable in the current case as well. Why do we need to ensure disclosure? We need to ensure the disclosure for the ability of an innocent person to not be found guilty of a crime they didn't commit. The defense attorney, in order to do this, the defense attorney needs to have the right to request a reliability hearing. If we don't give them all that documentation, how can they ask for a reliability hearing? They have no idea what information has been provided. All right? During this process, though, it's very important that all information shall be protected at this time in terms of identifying information for the informant. The last thing we need is an informant to inform on someone and then wind up dead because they found the suspect found out who it was. During this reliability hearing, which can be waived by the defense attorney, the judge is to hear oral arguments on both sides, for and against. He's then to make a determination as to the reliability of that individual. If he determines that the person was reliable, it can be used in court. If he determines it's unreliable, it's much like a suppression hearing and the evidence will be suppressed. I think it's important we also do not remove the ability of one finding of unreliability to preclude them for their future use as informant. They may have good information in the future. However, we also can't hide the fact that they were deemed unreliable at a given point. We also must make sure that all the rules are followed. This is my 4th recommendation. If we put all these rules in place and we don't have a method to ensure that they're following the rules, what good does it do? In order to do so, we need to hold the justice system accountable. There needs to be criminal consequences for things like failing to document requirements, suborning false information, failing to disclose requirements, failure to abide by disclosing requirements, falsifying information relating to reliability, and the allowing of informant presentation false information in court. There should be severe consequences for any officer or handler who violates one of these issues. The handler convicted of misconduct in relation to the statute should face the same consequences of the one whose rights the handler violated should they have been convicted. In Angel's case, he was sentenced to death. In Mr. Gonzalez's case, he was sentenced to 40 years. In Mr. Gonzalez's case, it's very easy to argue that the police acted with gross misconduct. The police who did so should be facing the same 40-year sentence that he did. At this point, we've talked about the education of handlers, the required documentation to create paper trails and accountability. We've allowed for a defendant to have access to the information provided by a confidential informant so that the reliability can be tested. And we've held the handlers responsible for moral acts which may lead to the wrongful conviction. That leads me to my final step, and that's to ensure the program is working. In order to do so, I suggest we create a requirement that an annual report be submitted to the Office of the Attorney General of the State of Illinois by each department. Each department's report should include the number of informants currently used, the number of cases informants provide information for, the ratio of reliability versus unreliability, and the types of cases as a UCR code for each informant. Does everybody know what a UCR code is? It's a Unified Crime Report. Unified Crime Report. I should have put the acronym in there. It's Unified Crime Report. At any rate, this is what the FBI uses when tallying their information about crime statistics across the nation. This is needed to better understand how and when informants are used. Just like we need to hold each individual handler responsible, we need to ensure that the departments are held responsible to follow all these rules. In order to do so, we need to criminalize failure to participate. Holding somebody responsible in a large department is difficult, so let's thus start at the top. The chief administrator for any department is responsible for failure to participate.
Yes, this week.
The consequences of such should be a Class 4 felony of official misconduct. So this is the video I wanted to show y'all. It's in my slide here, but
yes, this week. It's a really moving tale, and that's a pun.
So what happens to them? They're on the wrong side of the track.
Well, it turns out when your legs are 3 inches long, being inside railroad tracks is basically like being in a prison. You can't get out.
Well, you mean between the tracks, the ties, they're between the tracks.
It's actually that when they get into the tracks, they overheat because they can't get out.
They can't climb back over the track.
Right, it's just too high.
So what did he do?
So he had a solution, and that is tiny little bridges.
Driver, put your hands out the window. I can see
And so
him.
you went out and videotaped his turtle bridges and the turtles?
Drop the cup.
We got a tour of the turtle bridges.
With your left hand. Open the door. Step out.
That's cute.
Very cute.
Stay facing away from us and step back until I tell you to stop.
And they're able to
Stop. Step to your right.
The track and then proceed.
Jab behind your head. Where's the little girl?
Where's the little
Where
girl?
is she, little girl?
Where's that girl? You know what we're talking about. Where's the little girl?
I don't know.
Where's the little girl? Hurry up!
Yeah.
Show us the little girl.
I don't know any little girl.
Where?
Whoa!
Where's the little girl? What are you talking about? The little girl? I don't know.
Where is she? You're going away for a long time.
I don't know. There's the little girl.
Yes, you can see it on our website in action. Turtles escaping their death with these tiny bridges.
How many bridges are there? A lot of bridges?
Yeah, it's like every 50 feet or 50 yards there are bridges.
Wow.
All right. Have any of you seen that video before? It cracks me up every time I watch it. I love it. Have you seen Super Troopers? It reminds me of Super Troopers. Technical difficulties. All right. By the way, they're coming out with a second Super Troopers movie like later this year. I can't wait for it. It'll be hilarious, I'm sure. At any rate, what this video exemplifies is what we do not want our police to be. We don't want our police to run around being bullies. We don't want them to harass people. We don't want them breaking the law. Remember, the goal of this reform is to protect innocents from wrongful conviction. To mitigate the possibility of wrongful conviction due to improper use of incentivized criminal informants, we need to do two things. First, we need not to attempt to change the criminal themselves. We're not going to do that. We've been trying for thousands of years to change the criminal mindset, and we haven't figured out a way to do it. What we need to do instead is hold the handlers and the justice system responsible and accountable for misdeeds done to these innocent individuals. To do this, we need to educate our handlers on the proper methods of dealing with informants. We need to ensure documentation so paper trail exists and the reliability can be tested. We need to ensure that defense has access to the information provided by the informant and be allowed to examine the reliability of the information and test it in the courts. We need to criminalize the handler's failure to abide by the law, to abide by the U.S. Constitution, and for the allowance of misconduct. We need to give ourselves the ability to measure the level of success so we can make changes if necessary.
Yes, this week.
Not listen to it again. It is my belief that through these reforms, we can reduce the number of wrongful convictions due to the use of incentivized criminal informants. 2, we reduce police corruption through the use of transparency and accountability. I don't think either of those things are bad goals, do you? Not at all. My hope is from today that you guys, I have a petition that I forgot to set out for you, but I'll set it out here in a second. I have a petition that I'd like you guys to sign, that we can maybe push forward some type of reform of this nature to our government elected officials. In addition, I have some documentation that I'm going to give each of you that goes into a little bit more detail of each one of my slides. It's just one paper, one piece, front or back. I'd like you to share that documentation with 2 other people. And if they share it with 2 other people, so on and so forth, maybe we can get something done. Finally, my email address is right up here. I'd like you to share my email address with any other person who may want to present this information or who may have questions about it. That way I can answer it for them. I'd like to thank you all for your time, and if you all have any questions at this time, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Are they always criminals, like the confidential informants? Do they always have a criminal history?
Not always, no. At that point, you really have to question the motivation behind why they are informing on another individual. There's cases in which somebody may volunteer to be an informant when their significant other has gotten in trouble and they're trying to get their significant trouble out of jail. I had a case in which a girl had overdosed on multiple different drugs, and during the course of that she passed out and she had sex with an individual. She told her boyfriend the next day he wanted to file rape charges. They called me. I had to investigate that case. In speaking with her, she wasn't quite truthful with the boyfriend. It turned out to be a case where she was partying, got involved with a guy. He found out, so she made up a story to cover her butt. So no charges were brought against the other male. However, this gentleman was so upset with her access to drugs that he agreed to go ahead and be an informant for me. I ended up using him here in in Urbana. We had a bunch of Oxycontin and some other drugs delivered through that gentleman. This was right at the top of 2 years ago when the shootings were happening, every other day.
So
we were able to get this guy with a Class X amount of drugs on him And we were able to flip him to get more information about a house in town in Champaign that was involved in 2 of the last 3 shootings. We recovered guns and drugs out of that house. So yes, criminal informants are needed, as I just explained, and they're not always criminals.
Do they pay the informants a certain like cash or maybe a check or something for helping them?
They can, and again, it goes back to motivation. There has to be ways to motivate people. I've had instances where I'd bring on an informant. I had an informant wanting to get out of a speeding ticket. It was a Class B speeding ticket because he was going like 110 on his motorcycle, but he didn't want the Class B misdemeanor. So he agreed to be an informant, and same type of situation. I ended up getting him to do a couple buys for me, and I stopped somebody who was selling to Bar Muhammad. So as far as the payment goes, it generally is up to department policy. Some department policies do dictate that you can't pay them at all. That individual ended up wanting to continue to work, and I was allowed to pay him a per diem. They're not employed by the police department, but I can give them a stipend basically in order to say, hey, thank you for your help. We're giving you this in return. Usually it was a very low amount though. Something along the lines of, well, I guess low amounts are best subjective. $20 an hour, something along those lines, I think was what the department policy was.
And you do consider informants to be snitches. That was one of my questions, but you have answered that throughout your presentation by saying snitches.
It depends on vernacular. It's really they're synonymous terms. One's a pejorative term, the other is not. When you're saying confidential informant, that's a nice way to to call somebody a snitch. When you're trying to work a snitch, the last thing you want to do is tell them, hey, you're a snitch, because it has the negative connotation to it. Who wants to be a snitch? Nobody wants to be a snitch. But how many of you have told on your little brother or sister for punching you? Oh, come on.
I was always getting told on.
You get my point, though. Everybody is snitched in some fashion at some point, okay? It's just happened. Nobody can claim complete innocence. And you'd be surprised, the toughest individuals who say things like snitches get stitches. Those are usually ones. Those are usually the ones who are quickest to flip, but they're also usually the ones who are in their higher shit too. They're moving bigger weights of drugs. They know where the guns are. They know where the crimes are being committed.
So if a guy was in trouble, like killing somebody, and his mom came in as an informant, like, would they frown upon, like, say somebody else came in, would they favor the mom's opinion or the other person's opinion more because, like, the mom's related to him?
Again, they're going to look at motivation, and that's where we need to ensure that the motivation's not too strong, and we need to take it with a grain of salt. Would any of you want your baby? Do any of you have children? No? Man, I'm old. My daughter just graduated high school.
Not old, he's wiser.
At any rate, when dealing with an informant, you have to be very cognizant of their motivation and why they are giving you the information. Okay. In this case, a mom trying to protect her son. There's reasons why that woman would lie, and you need to make sure that you corroborate everything in order to keep up with her, or in order to make sure that she's following the correct procedures.
All right. Sorry to cut you off.
Good. Yeah,
if anybody has questions for Jeremy, feel free to stay around and he can answer those for you. Otherwise, hand in your questions to me and I'll see everybody on Friday.
All right. If anybody did want to sign a petition, it's right here. I also have the fact sheets to give to each of you if you'd like. Yes, sir. Like I said, if you don't know your voter registration number, like I don't know, don't worry about it.
feel like personally, it depends on what it is. If you got a friend that's so hot, you know, just on real estate, if you got you might be like that.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to what your.
I know, it's disgusting.
Who does that? What child does it? College is not
You want the truth, or you want the canned answer that I was supposed to give? Yeah.
But just your honest.
My honest answer, it was a requirement for my course.
Yeah, good enough for me.
In all honesty, I believe officers should be held to a higher standard than individuals, simply because we're given the responsibility much higher than these individuals. We're given power to remove someone's civic rights. Can you imagine that power? I mean, you could really screw someone else's life up. So if an officer is going out of his way to, for whatever reason, to send someone up the creek for no good apparent reason, I will never agree with that. I will, any officer doing things of that nature, I'll be the first to stand up and turn him in. And it didn't make me always popular in my department. I turned a couple people in for some things, and they didn't like it very much. But I'm not there to make friends. I'm there to do my job and to the best of my ability. I swore an oath, and I'm sticking by the oath I swore.
Even though it was a requirement for your master, would you say you kind of gone behind it a little bit more and have more of a drive to maybe pursue some form of change, or?
Yeah, I would say so. What I haven't told the course is I did set up a meeting with our state senator, Senator Bennett, and I've already had a meeting with him, and he is actually going to be taking some of our information to the House Judiciary Committee to see if we can go that route. The reason I wanted to do the petition and whatnot and give the presentation was to maybe push that forward a little bit. So while I had the requirement to give my public presentation like I did here, I've already taken steps to go beyond the classroom work and actually try to affect change. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. If you have my email address, anything you need, I don't know that I included that.
I already wrote it down.
All right. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, have a nice day, sir.
You as well.